Coming up, after firing Jacque Vaughn, the Brooklyn Nets searched far and wide, high and low, and ultimately hired in-house candidate Kevin Ollie. As the next head coach for the Brooklyn Nets, we dive in on the breakdown and what it means for the Nets going forward, coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. He's Doug Norrie. I'm Adam Marbrecht. We thank you, as always, for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use promo code all lowercase LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match of up to $100. And Doug, when they tell you TBD in the future, we will name our coach, turns out they mean about half a day.
Yeah, it was pretty predictable. Kevin Ollie reported to be the Nets new interim coach. Important distinction around the wording there with what his label is going to be. Though when we recorded following the Jacque Vaughn firing, this was where we guessed it was going. With the only stipulation was that it just hadn't happened right away. So we held out a little bit of reservation that it could be someone else on the staff that was going to take over as interim coach. Though, I mean, smart/major money would have been on Kevin Ollie taking this over based on sort of like the talk around him coming in, hearing what players have said throughout the year, and just sort of understanding where the hierarchy was. Partly thinking that, like, you know, that he was even in contention for other head coaching jobs during this offseason. So feels like a pretty obvious move. We'll talk about sort of what it means for the team, what he brings to the table. But from a surprise perspective, we're going to put this at basically zero. Once Jacque Vaughn was fired, it was pretty obvious, I felt, that Kevin Ollie would be the next, at least the interim coach here, with the caveat of, like, we're not sure what's going to happen after this season.
Yeah, and one of the first things that I thought about is we talked about when Jacque Vaughn was fired, felt as though maybe getting through the season, because you don't want to put the next coach or interim coach at a disadvantageous position, which Ollie may be in here over the remainder of the season. We'll talk about that. Is also, as you mentioned, if Kevin Ollie is a name with some buzz around it that could be looked at for head coaching positions, if you're the Brooklyn Nets in a season that wasn't going well and Jacque Vaughn maybe was losing the players in the locker room a little bit, okay, let's go ahead and give this young coach that could be on the come up here an opportunity to claim his spot, and then we also get to claim him, right? Rather than maybe go through a cycle as we've seen Udoka, although for other off the court reasons, ended up slipping through their fingers. If you want to go positive, you can say this was the proactive decision for the Brooklyn Nets here over the last 28, 29 games of the season.
Yeah, for sure. Right. Like, if they can see the writing on the wall, if the idea here was the locker, Vaughn had kind of lost the locker room and Kevin Ollie hadn't. And if we use some of the player quotes, we can kind of, you know, it doesn't take much. They're not reading too many tea leaves here to kind of figure this out, what was going on behind the scenes. Shams Charania reported this, that there had been like growing sort of resentment inside the locker room about sort of the players not totally feeling what Vaughn was doing in terms of system was going to be advantageous for them. You know, we've heard Dennis Smith speak in game around Kevin Ollie, his film studies leading into certain games to like sort of know the scheme. Spencer Dinwiddie spoke about him when questioned about the media. I mean, there are lots of stuff here that showed that he had command of the locker room without maybe being subversive, which would make these situations are always tricky, right? These guys are ultimately there for the team, ultimately maybe wanting head coaching jobs themselves. That's not a knock, right? This is just, most guys would rather be the head coach than the assistant coach. Like, I think that's pretty obvious when you start staring at NBA benches. So maybe the situation was getting like a little tricky from that respect, or maybe the Nets just felt, rightfully so, like they had possibly just a better basketball mind in-house, and there was time to just turn over the reins to him because they had him here to maybe see if he was going to be the long-term replacement, which he might end up being. It's unclear. Unlike the Jacque Vaughn situation from last year, where he was the interim, then he was the head coach, and then he had a 3-year contract like 20 minutes later. Right. It does not seem like they're going to go that route, and I don't think they should, but it does seem like they feel like, probably from a basketball perspective, my guess is they feel like they're taking a step up here.
Yeah. Yeah, you would hopefully. You'd hope so. I mean, listen, if you feel like you're going neutral here over the last 28, 29 games of the season, then it's more problems than on Sean Mark's ledger than he probably wants to have going into the offseason, whether or not the Nets are going to try to pursue stars or not. All these things, I think, do play a positive factor into moving on from Jacque Vaughn, because at a minimum, it didn't look like you were going to say, well, Jacque Vaughn is a plus here in terms of the moves we want to make, in terms of attracting other players, right? Kevin Ollie, at least from a coaching perspective, and then going beyond his playing career, just for the brief background, he played for the New Jersey Nets. We all knew that in 2000, but also played for, this guy was a journeyman, right? He had that Jeff Green kind of vibe about him. The Mavericks, the Magic, the Kings, the 76ers again, the Bulls, the Pacers, the Bucks, the Supersonics, the Cavs, along with the Timberwolves, along with the Oklahoma City Thunder, and yes, by the way, also the 76ers for a third time over his career. Then he moved on, though, and went back to the coaching ranks with UConn. After Calhoun retired, he handed over the reins to him, won a tournament championship in 2014 with that group, and then moved on from there after effectively fizzling out a little bit, so to speak. So, but again, from college ranks to the pros, maybe losing some traction with recruiting and other things like that. He goes to overtime elite and then makes his way to the NBA level, G League, Brooklyn Nets. So he's in the pipeline a little bit. Does all of this track like a coach that has kind of hit the incremental benchmarks you want before rising to this opportunity? Unlike maybe most recent example, Jacque Vaughn. Before that, Steve Nash, guy not really doing a lot of NBA anything, did some coaching internationally. Steve Nash with Team Canada, then all of a sudden gets thrust in kind of as a figurehead. Jacque Vaughn, long history and not necessarily a great track record, right? The sample size maybe told you which way the arrow would point for this team under Vaughn. This feels like a guy that, at least in theory, this is all upswing now for the Brooklyn Nets.
Yeah, look, like I said, he was in contention for that Pistons job.
Yes.
All talk of him has been a highly respected guy. The exit from UConn wasn't like on the most positive note, but had gotten kind of glowing reviews from his time at Overtime Elite, which is just all player development, right? Yep. And so if you feel like the Nets are entering sort of like that stage, or just like they need to build up a little bit, maybe he's that kind of guy. Is he like a hardcore X's and O's NBA guy? Like we said, it's hard to sometimes know these things. Guys, the players have praised some of the film work and some of the scheme work that he had put out there, but when it's all under your control, it's sometimes very difficult to understand these situations, right? The guys it can look perfect, and then all of a sudden it gets harder, or you get to the Peter Principle idea where it's like you sort of ascend to your level of least competency, right? I'm not saying that's what it is, but it's sometimes, sort of like deploying a new app. It's really hard to test in real time. It's going to be like, we're just going to have to, you're going to have to sit on the bench and we're going to have to figure it out there, right? Like, it's just going to be really, really tough to know. I will say, in terms of just pedigree, it would feel like this makes sense, right? Yes. Like lots of different team situations. I think for a coach, that is a good thing, right? Lots of different team situations, lots of different players, played in lots of different schemes, and then went to the college route, went to the development route, and now has to respect the players too. Like, if you're putting together a coach resume, it feels like that's kind of what you want to be able to do if you're going to X player level, right? It's not just like X star goes and sits on the bench and hopefully the thing that made him a star as a player will make him a star as a coach. Like, we know that doesn't really always translate. Being sort of a journeyman player and understanding that there's lots of different situations with lots of different players, I think that probably is a better thing to have on your resume when it's all said and done, if you're trying to guess at which players will become good coaches. And again, it's like mostly guesswork, but there's nothing to believe that he won't make a good head coach. Like, we kind of thought that when he got hired as an assistant coach, thinking, oh, I wonder if like this is, we said at the time,
I wonder if they hired a contingency plan. That's exactly what we thought at the time. Right.
Yes, exactly. Right. So like, if you thought that at the time, there's no reason to dovetail, or there's no reason to just sort of dismiss yourself from that original thought. We're going to talk a little bit more here in a second about some of the player comments that have been made about him, what new rotations could look like, what this means, so maybe short-term and long-term for Kevin Ollie. We'll get there in a second. First, going to tell you about our friends over at Prize Picks. Prize Picks Daily Fantasy made so easy. Right now, it's Demons and Goblins time over on Prize Picks, where you can win up to 100 times your money with just 4 correct picks. You do the math there. You can turn $10 into 1,000 over on Prize Picks. Over on Prize Picks, you're going more or less on the Prize Picks projections. But if you're going with the Red Demons or Green Goblins, which you're going to see in some of the different picks, it's just going to change some of the different payouts that you're going to get. And some of those numbers are going to look real enticing. Some of those are going to look a little harder to get, but that's all part of what you're getting over on Prize Picks, going more or less on those projections: points, rebounds, assists, blocks, steals. That's for the NBA. They're getting into MLB here right around the corner. Obviously, home runs, hits, stolen bases. It's all there. You can combine more or less projections on different players and different sports. Like I said, win up to 10. Oh, excuse me. I said 10, but I was undershooting at 100 times your money over on Prize Picks. You go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. That's prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA. Use the code LockedOnNBA. First deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It's that easy.
All right, so as we continue a very busy, 6-hour span, but you'll hear this over the course of 48 hours on the podcast feed over on YouTube as well. We remind you, as always, to get over to WeGotNets.com, sign up for your free ebook. It's 5 stories in 5 days. All you got to do is plug in your email, and it's all about some of the big moments throughout the Nets history, from Brooklyn going all the way back to the Jersey days. You can also reach out to us with comments. Do you think Kevin Ollie was the no-brainer hire for Brooklyn? Get after us there and get your free ebook at WeGotNets.com today. Now, before we dive in on rotation impact and who we think benefits and the outlook here, Doug, I want to tap into what could feel like in another timeline for the Brooklyn Nets. Little quote for you from a current player in the NBA speaking about Kevin Ollie. Really felt like that Kevin Ollie taught him the ropes and changed the culture of Oklahoma City. He also added, Kevin Ollie, he was a game changer for us. I think he changed the whole culture in Oklahoma City, just his mindset, professionalism every single day. And we all watched that, and we all wanted to be like that. It rubbed off on Russell Westbrook, myself, Jeff Green, James Harden. And then everybody who comes through now, it's the standard that you've got to live up to as a Thunder player. And it all started with Kevin Ollie. Hey, it's Kevin Durant, guys.
I was gonna say, who's that? Kendrick Perkins?
the old Perkins. No, but I mean, I just listen, tongue in cheek here. But in a world where the Nets had just had Kevin Ollie on the staff at last trade deadline, maybe there was a decision you could have made to put him in place. And when Kevin Durant says, I'm thinking about moving on, you go, but buddy, we've got a guy that you really like, you respected as a young player once upon a time in this league. Listen, the woulda, coulda, shouldas, hopefully those glowing words from Kevin Durant hold real weight. And you mentioned it there just in the first segment about usually journeyman players are the guys that get it the most. Why? Because they're grinding it out. They're learning different systems, different schemes. How do I fit and serve other better players on rosters? You'd like to think that becomes very applicable as a head coach, where you get to say, okay, I remember myself in versions of these different roles on different teams. How do I make everybody come together here? So when we think about the current roster and the current rotation, top of your head, who do you think stands to benefit the most? I mean, more than one player here, but who benefits the most on this roster now going forward with Kevin Ollie at the helm?
Okay, let me start on a high level. I think that we will see, first and foremost, before we even get pause 1 second on the rotations, and we'll say, I think we see definitive scheme adjustments to start, right? I think we will see more of a hierarchy in terms of the offense. And this is going to trickle down to like which players I think it's going to help the most. But I'll say that they weren't really running an offense, right? The Nets weren't running a definitive system. Now, it came out from Shams before that they had like just relied too heavily on scheming for Ben Simmons in the off season, and then like lo and behold, he can't play, and now it's not an excuse, but it's just like why things might have gone off the rails. If you watch this team a lot, they're not really running many principles in terms of system. I do think you're going to see that change. It maybe at least a little, and possibly dramatically here, if they're just running more identified sets, if they're running like more point guard stuff. So the guys that I could see it probably helping the most, or we see more of. I do wonder if we're going to see more Dennis Schroeder, because he's just going to be able to run just better sets with the ball in his hand, like more pick and roll and some of this stuff. I wonder, and I do believe we're going to just see, hopefully, better opportunities for the best scorers in Bridges and in Cam Thomas. Now, I know that's like sort of I know you probably want to, we can talk about some of these other guys, because I think you're probably thinking about like more development stuff. And I agree with that. But I just think that Kevin Ollie is going to be very incentivized to win, right? Like this is not a tanking team. They're not firing the coach. They can go in the tank or something. Like they want to win. I do think we quickly see a more organized offense that has that at least operates off core principles, right? Like more action, more movement, more just like more, frankly, I mean, more pin downs, more off ball screens, more things that can free up guys like Bridges and Cam Thomas to score, and then more pick and roll, which is just, they just have to run more. Like they run. They seem like they run so little. And so and they just have personnel to do it. So winding answer to say, I think the guys who benefit the most are the guys who will be put in better offensive situations now, because before they just were, it was like kind of, it felt like, let's roll the balls out on the court and see what happens. And that, I don't think I don't think you do a lot of favors to guys in that situation.
No, and I agree with you in that offensively, we talk about when Ben Simmons came back, you can see his impact. And it's true. And it was very positive and getting the ball off the rebound in transition, even off of made baskets. But the half court is still where things completely bogged down for the Brooklyn Nets. And then specifically, I'll tell you another space too. I think, we talk about, Ben Simmons and Claxton and can that fit or work or not. I think that if you're Kevin Ollie, there's an opportunity here to say, hey, listen, we're going to break this up however I deem fit, but we're going with definitive decisions around rotations, right? No more of this. Well, as Jacque Vaughn would often say, we heard Cam Thomas not knowing when were my minutes coming, where I was going to play late games or not. And it was, I know everyone might prefer that, but you never know with matchup to matchup. You would assume that a hierarchy will be developed here. And on the offensive end, as you mentioned, that there'll just be specific sets to run, because at some point here, whether or not we all agree that the high level talent on this roster is clearly capped relative to other teams that have superstars, it has to be better than what we saw. It has to be better than when you watch the clock just drain down. We saw this in one of the early, I think the first Boston game, where Nicholas Claxton was dribbling around the top of the arc. I'm not even blaming him. He's dribbling around looking for somewhere to go with it. And while you can look at the off-ball actions and players trying to get themselves free of defenders, that's a really elite team you're playing in Boston. All great, wonderful. You need to be able to scheme guys open. And you mentioned guys like Thomas. You mentioned guys like Bridges as well. I agree.
And the Nets more than anybody have to do it more. Like, they don't have great on-ball guys.
Yeah, you're incentivized to actually be overcooking on offense to get.
Yeah, like Cam Thomas is a great scorer. I'm not positive he's a great on-ball guy all the time, right? And I know people are gonna say, well, yeah, he is because he can score. Well, it's true. He can make very difficult shots. He's not a great facilitator of offense. It's not a knock against him. They need to get the ball in his hands in really advantageous situations. I think we're gonna see more of a focus on that. Same with Bridges. Bridges is not an amazing on-ball guy, but he can score if given the right situations. So I think that we're just going to see more off-ball screening actions to get these guys open, right? They didn't have that. It was kind of get the guy the ball at the nail and see if he can get around his defender, which a lot of times they can't. Right?
Which shock, they mostly can't.
Right. So I just think I hope to say we get away from those. And I think these guys are probably in a situation where they can buy in quickly to something that seems organized, right? Yeah. I think that's probably the biggest beneficiary, is that my guess is these guys are really wanting that, right? And they just didn't have it. There was no tenants. There was no offensive tenants and principles that you could sort of rely on, except for DHOs, and hopefully they can beat the first guy. And if they can, then we're in good shape. And if not, it's going to be 5 seconds left in the shot clock and we're in trouble. That was kind of what the Nets offense was.
And I want to get into more player specifics in a second, but I'll close out on this thought here, that when we talk about the roster and kind of having all these, 2A or whatever, that grouping of talent of players, the defined roles is probably something that, not instilling that from a Jacque Vaughn perspective, he gets lost in the, well, I've got 8 guys that are all pretty good, so I kind of want to use them all. But all of those players of that skill set, even more so, need the construct and the hierarchy and the pecking order, because they're not used to being thrust maybe elevated role and then losing that role, right? Being shuffled around and on game to game or possession to possession basis, kind of being treated like, well, you're the number one here for the next 5 minutes. Now 5 minutes after that, you may be the guy that doesn't even see the ball, right? So consistency from that standpoint would be, I think, a welcomed change here for the Brooklyn Nets. In a second, I have a sneaky player that I believe will benefit in a big way for the Brooklyn Nets. And we'll also talk about veterans compared to youth coming up here in just 1 second.
All right, this next segment is brought to us by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Look, sometimes we just need the opportunity to get stuff off of our chats. It can be big stuff, small stuff. Sometimes those things in life can start getting to you, whether it's how you're communicating with your kids, how you're communicating with your spouse or your friends, whether you're dealing with life's big things or little things in a way that's making you feel good at the end of the day. Making sure that those little big things don't just really impact your life. This is where BetterHelp can step in, help give therapy a try, gives you someone to talk to, someone that's going to listen, someone that can walk you through life's big moments and life's small moments too, because all that stuff can really benefit from therapy. And this is where BetterHelp comes in. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than just like our favorite sport teams talking about this stuff. It's important to get that stuff off of your chest every once in a while. If you're thinking of starting therapy, give BetterHelp a try. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible. It's suited to your schedule. All you have to do, visit betterhelp.com/lockedonnba. You're going to get 10% off of your first month. That's betterhelp, HELP.com/lockedonnba.
All right, so as we wrap up today's Locked On Nets episode, we of course remind you, as always, go over to wegotnets.com, sign up for that free ebook, 5 stories in 5 days, and so much more, as you'll be alerted when we're providing some additional content there. And also reach out to us. There's a little contact form. Give us your questions, your comments, and yes, continue to ask us for more stories. We know we need to continue to produce these for the Brooklyn Nets faithful on wegotnets.com. Quickly before we talk, not even quickly, but other guys that are going to benefit here. I'm gonna tell you right now, maybe fans have forgotten about this guy or they'd like to forget about him. I think Cam Johnson benefits massively from this change here because he's an off-ball guy that we said coming into the season, and maybe this is me wanting to fill my cup up, back again here a little bit on Cam Johnson. He's had the injuries, obviously that's hurt him a little bit. But coming into the season, I viewed him as a guy that could do a little bit more on ball than maybe he had shown in Phoenix. We saw a little bit of it last year with the Nets. And he just kind of gets lost in the wash. Now, the injuries have played a big factor, but I would love to see that Kevin Ollie starts to find ways to scheme him open or scheme him into plus matchups, especially on the offensive end, where you get to kind of take advantage of when you look across this roster. He's probably one of the more athletic guys here, being able to get into the paint and go at the rim. That's faded a lot this season. Last year, you look at him relative to Phoenix, he had upped those numbers going at the basket, has not been there. Again, injuries may be a big factor here, but I could see a world where we see him tick a little bit closer, even just to last year's numbers, being a 17, 18 point a game scorer for this roster, as opposed to where he's basically been fading away here. Again, we know injuries have played a role in that.
Yeah, I think that's a great call. I think the Nets, if you think about them, have a lot of sort of scheme-dependent guys on their team. Like sometimes you have guys who are just like sort of offensive engines, right? Like the superstar guys that are schemes in and among themselves, right?
Yeah.
The Nets kind of had one in Durant for a long time. It's like, I don't know. He can have the ball with 5 seconds left in the shot clock. That's fine. Pretty much. Right. Like it's good. Kyrie's kind of like this too, to some degree, or a lot of a degree. It's like
as good, reliable, or more reliable than giving any other player 20 seconds of the shot clock to figure it all out. Right.
Of course. Right. So like you have sort of like schemed independent guys, and those even could be like guys like, and then coaching and scheme can make them even better. Right. Like Jokic, Luka, Giannis, guys like this. Then you can have just like scheme dependent guys that are really good NBA players, but definitely need to work within a system that's going to be able to bring out the most in them. And the Nets have a lot of guys like this. And sometimes people will qualify those as like role players, but they have like, super role players like this that are really good at certain things too. Like Bridges, like Cam Johnson. They have other guys, and one guy that's like kind of not like that is Simmons, because he can kind of create a lot of his own opportunities in terms of transition with shooters, but definitely needs a system to work under in the half court to make sure he's optimized. So like they have lots of guys like this. And I think your Cam Johnson call is great, because the thing that we hope to see from him was a leap into, 2-way scorer. That's just didn't happen. And it's not going to happen, but that doesn't make him like a negative NBA player. It just means that they need to get him into places where he can spot up shoot, right? Like where he can every once in a while take someone off the dribble, but not too often, maybe get in the mid range every once in a while, but lean into the things that he does well. They just haven't done that. And so the opportunity to do it should be here.
Yes.
If it can just be drawn up with the basics.
Yep.
The basics.
Yep.
It's not gonna be great. Like this team's not gonna be a great offense, but they really should be better than what they are. Right.
Yeah,
and
remember, We saw Cam Johnson score 7 points to start a game and then not have another bucket or even another shot sometimes until into the fourth quarter, right? Like it cannot exist that way. You need to be able to find that ebb and flow.
And so there's some chance too with Vaughn where they had reached a point where even if he had like started to pull out a bag of tricks at different things, I think we were probably at the point where the players were probably done listening to it. Right. So like even if there had been those things kind of happening, if they had just gone into checkout mode, hey, look, if you got kids, I know what this is like. They go into checkout mode and it's over. Right. It's over. Right. It's like anybody, humans too. If I go into checkout mode with anybody, it's like, well, good luck, right. Like, and so I think just like having a new voice who they already respect will allow them to make these tweaks to the offense that should be better. And I mean, I think Ollie's even known more for his defense too. So like if the defense is going to, because we're mostly talking about offense, sometimes it's a little easier to see, but the defense too should have an impact also if they can get to being able to scheme their way into like more consistent systems, switching up depending on personnel, just throwing different looks at teams, switching sometimes, dropping sometimes, zoning sometimes, right? Like, and just being able to, they have enough defenders, I think, on the team, better combinations. Like, hey, maybe Lonnie Walker plus DSJ plus Cam isn't a great combination because they're all 6'3" or whatever, right? Like just better combinations they could stand. There was just lots of like low-hanging fruit that the Nets just left hanging there, I think, based on just simple bad decisions over the course of the year.
Yeah, if we talk about, we said this coming into the season, the Nets are going to win games. We thought like defensively, that's how they'll win games in the margins. And then over the course of the season, you felt, oh, well, there's actually a lot of margins where they're losing. That they need to be winning, bad combinations, etc. So for sure,
we would talk all the time this season. I mean, go back, like all these combinations that made no sense.
Oh yeah,
even in the moment
of many a post game podcast was, wait, what was this for 7 minutes?
Like starting lineups that made no sense and rotations that made no sense, and even if they made sense, they would go away from it in favor of things that just came out of nowhere and then disappeared just as quickly. Like there was just lots of this stuff going on, and that I think, there was a floundering aspect there. Maybe this has a stabilizing force where we just say, hey, these are our 8 guys. This is who's playing, right? Like we're going to have some development. We're going to try to work in some of these players. Injuries will probably cover some of that for us anyway. And like, that's just what we're going to do over the course of the season. I just think there's just going to be a general stabilizing effect, mostly because there had been this sort of, like I said, floundering aspect to the team for a while now that we had just commented on in a myriad of different ways.
Yeah, I'm very curious to see. You mentioned defensively as we close out this episode. Obviously, Kevin Ollie named the interim head coach for the Brooklyn Nets, and will carry this team forward, hopefully, to a playoff or play-in tournament, I should say, appearance. The last quick things for me are that defensively, you mentioned there, even combinations when you talk about, certain teams also scheme from one side of the court to the other, where it's okay, yes, you two in tandem will be switching all the time in terms of your defensive assignments. But as that ball rotates around to the far side, it's a different operation, not asking every player to do the same thing on a given defensive possession. Likewise, offensively, and we have extra time to talk about this before they play again on Thursday, I do like the idea of, while we love what Ben Simmons brings to the table in terms of transition game, you have to get other guys up to speed and get them moving that ball quickly. How do you utilize and value Ben Simmons in the offense when the ball is in his hands, right? Because we've seen far too much of that as well, even when he came back. Jacque Vaughn may have been dependent on Ben Simmons to make this team successful, but he also clearly didn't have a plan of attack for him, and Nick Claxton, by the way, likewise, right? You need to find a way to make value out of every 5 players on the court on the offensive end, not get lost in the point where you say, we're kind of an average offensive team with very little scheming, and now we're going to pull away one of our 5 guys and see if we can beat you 4-on-5. It was a lot of recipes for disaster, so some areas to look for there, and I'm sure we'll talk about one Jalen Wilson before we get to Thursday night. Don't worry.
Yeah, but sorry, I think you wanted to talk more about him. But
just know that it's there, guys. It's waiting to happen.
Look, one last thing here too. One thing to know about Ollie's like sort of landing spot here is the Nets, according to Tankathon, have the second easiest remaining strength of schedule. So if there was going to be a time to let Vaughn go
after those 2 Boston games, look at that.
Right, exactly. So only Orlando has an easier strength of schedule with teams remaining based on win-loss record. So this should be a stretch where they can make some push, right, based on who they're playing. So in terms of putting best foot forward for the guy, this does seem like the timeline to do it, right? Like if you were going to do it, this is the timeline to do it. And look, we're Nets fans. We want it to work out. We wanted it to work out with Vaughn. Like
Yeah,
I
by the
want,
way.
like I wanted it to work out there. It didn't work out, right? Like obviously we want all these situations as Nets fans. We want all these situations to work out. We never, root against a win because we don't, like somebody. That'd be insane. So Kevin Ollie, hopefully he's just entered the best spot to be able to push forward with this team. We'll see how it goes over this remaining stretch. In the meantime, make sure you win by going to wegotnets.com, signing up for that free ebook, and make sure you subscribe over on YouTube as well. We're trying to get up to 7,000 YouTube followers.
Oh, stop this day and night with me, and you shall possess the origins of all poems. You shall possess the good of the earth and the sun. There are millions of the suns left. You shall no longer take things at second or third hand, nor look through the eyes of the dead, nor feed on the specters in books. Why, that is Walter Whitman.
One of the all-time great poets, and long-winded, man.
Well, he was breathy, I will say. I sometimes did think Walt Whitman, heck of a guy, could be more concise.
And just say, hey, leaves the grass and look outside, yada yada yada. Get
Oh my
get
God,
on
the nature, wasn't it also grand? Walt
just
Whitman.
get on with it. Anyway, one of the all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Basketball.